Evening. My name is Nicole. I'm a Ventura County Master Gardener. This is our speaker series. Tonight's presentation is Growing Winter Vegetables. Our speaker today is Lee Rosenboom, who has been a Master Gardener since 2012. His area of expertise is vegetable gardening and is a strong proponent of raised bed gardening. He volunteers regularly at the Ojai Master Gardener site and truly enjoys talking about gardening. He has given talks on summer vegetable gardening, raised bed gardening, and winter vegetable gardening. Today, he will talk to us about how to grow a winter vegetable garden. You will learn what types of veggies grow best in winter months, and you will receive information on soil prep, irrigation, and pest control. Lee, it's over to you.
Okay, thanks, Nicole. Most of my life, we've lived in northern areas. I grew up in Idaho, and we lived in Iowa and Michigan. We moved to California in '96, and one of the things that caught me was nobody grew plants in the wintertime. And, I've lived in areas where you couldn't, and you move to California and you can. So that's been one of my missions, is to try to convert people to garden in the wintertime. So with that, we'll get started. The learning objective for today is to kind of understand the differences between cool season and warm season vegetables. And then I want to review the management of vegetable gardening and review some of the advantages of raised bed gardening. I'm a real strong proponent of raised bed gardening, as Nicole said. And before I became a master gardener, I did not use raised beds, and I use nothing else now. So it's a really great way to grow, and there's lots and lots of advantages that I'll go into later. Why would you want to garden in the wintertime? Well, first of all, we're in a drought, as you know, and you will use less water in the wintertime. Now, you still need to use water, but you use less. The days are cooler, the days are shorter, and hopefully we get some rains this winter. We'll see. That jury's still out yet. I think you have less garden pests in the wintertime. You still have some, and some of them are different than what you see in the summertime. But overall, I think there's less. And in the wintertime, it's actually a little less work to maintain. The days are shorter. Things don't grow quite as fast because it's cooler. The days are shorter. So things slow down, and not at the fast pace that vegetables grow in the summertime. And because of that, harvest is not quite as time sensitive either. Many vegetables can be grown in late fall, winter, and early springs. And you need to know that these vegetables are generally not the same as the summer vegetables that you grow in the summertime. But the planning of a winter garden is very similar to the planning of a summer garden. Here's a list of a lot of vegetables that you can grow in the wintertime. There's all these root crops: carrots, beets, radishes, turnips, parsnips, garlic, leeks, onions, bunching onion, shallots, salsify, potatoes, and rutabaga. They all grow in the wintertime. And of course, here's a good list of leafy vegetables, and they are great in the wintertime. Some of these will grow in the summertime as well. If you're near the coast, you have items like Swiss chard, which tends to handle some heat, but for the most part, this is leafy greens that you can grow in the wintertime. The cabbage family, lots of vegetables: cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, kohlrabi, kale, collards, Brussels sprouts, and sprouting broccoli. And then some of the other crops: artichoke, asparagus, cress, peas, rhubarb, celery, and celeriac, herbs, fennel, cilantro, and parsley. These are all classified as winter vegetables, although some of them you might grow a little bit, might do a little bit in the summer, but for the most part, they really thrive in the wintertime. Okay, if you're planting a garden, this is kind of a review, hopefully, for you, but you want to plant it in an area with full sun. Select a level, sunny area with well-drained soil, have an adequate supply of water. Even though it's wintertime, plants still will require some supplement of water, so you need to have water available. And even if you just have a hose bed and hand water, that's fine, just as long as you have some available. If you're kind of new and you're cautious about getting started, you can start with a small plot or a container-sized garden. Almost any vegetable that can grow in a garden can also grow as a container plant. It's basically a mini raised bed. Prepare your soil carefully before you plant. I use raised beds and the soil is not compacted. So I have a turning fork and I turn it once, fertilize, and then turn it again. Another rule is plant vegetables that your family likes in quantities that you will use. And plant disease-resistant varieties that are adapted for your area. And this is pretty important, especially in winter areas where there's things that just won't thrive at all in our area. I've got a list here of what I call hardy vegetables and then half-hardy vegetables. And what I mean by hardy is they will withstand a good frost and still be okay. The half-hardy ones they will not die in a frost, but if they have any, like lettuce, the leaves the texture will change. And if on beets, the beet tops, a lot of people eat the beet tops and they will have a different texture. And Swiss chard and parsley, parsnip, broccoli, they all change the texture if they get affected by a freeze. But for the most part, they will survive, but they'll have some damage. Okay, where to plant? Well, I mentioned full sun. Vegetables require a minimum of 5 to 8 hours per day. And that's necessary for most crops. Root and leafy crops can tolerate some shade, but ideally the minimum of 5 to 8 hours per day is necessary, and that's a minimum. Full sun is just great for just about everything. If you're in an area that has some long winter shadows, it may be sunny in the summertime, but it may be totally shadows in the wintertime, and you would not want to plant in that area unless there's a few hours of direct sunlight that you could plant some leafy crops or root crops. And of course, water should be available and provided to each area where you're planting. Soil should be spaded or rototilled when it is moist but not wet. I mentioned I use a turning fork. It looks like a fork, and only the tines are flat, and it works really good when if your soil is really hard, it's not going to work very well. But if it's soft, it's been in a raised bed, it's pretty easy to turn. Good time to prepare a seed bed is in the autumn before the rains. Okay, that's now. Now is a great time to do your prep for your seed bed. And it also can be done in the spring. Actually, if you're going to plant a summer crop, you really need to prepare the bed again and refertilize. Work the soil about 6 to 10 inches deep, but avoid bringing any topsoil to the surface. The topsoil doesn't have the organic matter that most plants would like to be in. If the soil is too wet, wait a few days and try again. And this is really important. And after some rains, the soil can get very wet, and especially you really need to have an area. You be in an area where it's well drained. But if it is really wet after a rain, just wait a few days and try again to break up the days or the large plots a few days later. You may have to rake and dry the soil several times to achieve the desired soil conditions. And if the soil has hard, dry clods, wet them and try working them down again. And it's not a. Sometimes it takes a while if it's been hard and dry. But rake the turn seedbed in several directions while it is soft, full of moisture, so that any large clods or layered soil are broken up. Large dirt clods can cause really poor germination because seeds planted in or under them have little contact with the soil and possibly light, which plants need to survive and germinate. Watering schedule. Well, in the wintertime, it's kind of important to watch your watering schedule, because after rain you want to hold off watering for a little bit, and it needs to vary according to your soil and weather conditions. As a general rule, water should be applied within the top 1 to 2 inches of soil. When the top 1 to 2 inches of soil have dried out. Now, an exception to that rule is if you're planting seeds in that top 1 inch and it dries out, they will not germinate. So until they germinate, you need to make sure the top 1 to 2 inches is moist. Not sitting in water, but they should be moist. For optimal plant growth, the soil should be sorry, I've got some, can't see my whole screen. For optimal plant growth, the soil should be evenly moist as plants mature. Try to avoid alternating wet and dry conditions. And that may not be possible in the wintertime if there's a lot of rain, but in a raised bed, you've got a shot for the soil to dry out. Using a layer of mulch around the plants help conserve soil moisture and will reduce the frequency of irrigation. I like to use an organic mulch. A mulch is defined as anything you put on the top of the ground, and it will help conserve soil moisture and reduce the frequency of irrigation. But a layer of rocks around a plant is also classified as mulch, and I would not do that, but I like to use an organic mulch, as I said before. And mulch discourages the growth of weeds, and it does hold in moisture. So, and then of course, make sure that adequate water is able to move through the mulch layer into the root zone of the plants. Fertilizer should be applied before any new crop cycle begins. And this is really important, because if you've had a previous cycle or you haven't grown anything there for a while, any nutrients in that soil is at least partially expired, and you need to replenish that before you start a new cycle. And you can always side dress with fertilizer during the growing season as well. If you notice, if it's lacking in nitrogen, usually see some yellowing of the plant. But the first three ingredients here, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, that's the N, P, and K. And when you look, if you buy a bag of fertilizer at a garden store, you'll see three numbers. And the first one is nitrogen, the second one is phosphorus, the third one is potassium. And usually you don't have to well, there's certain things you want to apply straight nitrogen to, but most plants will survive with an even, like a 10-10-10, 12-12-12, 15-15-15. And that means out of 100 pounds of fertilizer, if it's 15-15-15, that means 15% of that is nitrogen, 15% is phosphorus, and 15% is potassium. In California, almost all of our soils are low in nitrogen, and phosphorus is low in some weathered soils. Potassium is usually not needed, but the plants if you give it a balance, if you give the plants a balanced fertilizer, the plants will take what they need, and as long as it's not at a toxic level, they'll do just fine. A couple of micronutrients, iron and zinc. Iron is usually deficient when an acid-loving plant is grown in an alkaline soil. Zinc is associated with deficiency is associated with the loss of topsoil. So that could be where you have a building site and they've removed all the topsoil and they've really not replaced it with really good soil. Really, really important to practice crop rotation. That means not planting the same family of crops in the same area year after year. There are nematodes in the soil. Some of them are beneficial, some of them are not. And if you leave the same family in that soil year after year after year, you're going to have a buildup of the unfriendly ones, the non-beneficial. And you'll notice a plant, it looks good one day, the next day it's laying on the ground, half dead. So if you've ever pulled a tomato plant out of the ground and noticed these little nodules on the roots, that's a nematode, and it's not a favorable one. You need to maintain normal levels of soil fertility. That means before you start a cycle, fertilize, and then watch it during the growing season to make sure that it looks like, make sure the plants aren't showing some yellowing and maybe need a side dressing of some soil. Irrigation should be well drained in the winter, and that's why I like raised beds. Adjust the frequency between seasons and between rain events. Here's a picture of some irrigation that I've set up. This bed is a 4x16. And I've got a 1/2-inch poly line going through the center of it, and then I think I've got about eight micro risers going off off to the side of that 1/2-inch poly with a micro emitter, and it's been working really well for me. 1/2-inch main line and a 1/4-inch drip, or a 1/4-inch poly with a emitter, micro emitter. Okay, let's talk about raised beds. Some of the benefits of raised beds is that raised beds will be warmer in the wintertime. The raised bed will be just plain warmer, and the soil will be warmer, and plants will grow a little bit better. Certainly, we talked about it before, but improved soil drainage. If you have a raised bed, as long as you don't put a hard clay soil in the raised bed, it should have really good soil drainage. I think you can put more vegetables in less space, but you have to be careful with that. You can go overboard, and you can actually end up with less yield if you overcrowd. But the plants should just provide a canopy when they're more mature and not crowding each other. Less soil compaction. This is really important. If you're walking in a raised bed, then you've designed it incorrectly. So you should not have a soil compaction problem in a raised bed, and that yields a much healthier root system. It definitely can be less work, less bending for plant culture and harvest. And one of the things that I like, I live in Upper Ojai, and I can screen out pests. You can put hardware cloth on the bottom and make it tall enough that the rabbits can't get in. Lower maintenance for weeding, irrigation, pest control, and replanting. I rarely have a problem with weeds in a raised bed, and if I do, it's real easy to hold them out. The soil is soft. The weeds will pull right out, and irrigation setup works really well. And I think you use less water with the micro drip system. And pest control and replanting. Hopefully you don't have to replant, but improve soil condition and moisture availability. And part of that is because of, well, you may or may not be using native soil. You may be using all soil that's brought in, but that can lead to improved soil condition and moisture availability. In a raised bed, you have pretty much total control over the soil texture. You can use native soil or not. I think it's a good way to balance nature's resources, and you can create some pretty neat designs, and it can be beautiful. So here's a picture of a raised bed for handicap. Actually, it's a pretty good raised bed for anybody, but especially good for somebody that's wheelchair bound. You can grow in that bed. You could grow just about everything that you could in another raised bed, and it looks like it's very handy for somebody in a wheelchair. Raised bed notes. Soil in a raised bed can be composed of any good potting mix or modified native soil. And raised beds should not be more than 4 feet wide for ease of planting and care, but may be as narrow as 12 inches if space is limited. Plants can be placed a little closer together for higher yield, but avoid that overcrowding. You just need to make a canopy over the soil, but if they're overcrowding, then you're going to pay for it in yield. Types of raised beds, shape is pretty much, you can make the shape anything, square, rectangle, circle, irregular. Just remember the 4-foot rule. And they can be composed of just about anything, wood, concrete, straw, brick, rock, and soil. If you've ever been, and actually you can see the raised beds in the strawberry fields in Oxnard right now. The plants have been planted. They're in a raised bed of soil, and it's about 1 foot tall. So strawberries really require good drainage, and that's why they put them in a raised bed. Raised beds, as I mentioned, are no wider than 4 feet, and that's twice the arm length, as long as you have access from both sides. If you only have access from one side, then your limit is 2 feet wide. Doesn't matter how long they are, and then I line mine with hardware cloth to protect from gophers. I use a 1/2 inch hardware cloth. It's got a little stronger gauge and won't rust out very soon. It'll last for years. If you use chicken wire, max you're going to get is 2 years. And if you want to protect from gophers, and gophers are really tough to get rid of once they get into a raised bed, without totally emptying the raised bed, turning it over, fixing putting more hardware cloth on the bottom. General height is 1 foot, but if you make them a little taller, like 1.5 to 2 feet, you can protect from rabbits. I used to have, my raised beds were 16.5 inches, and I thought they were rabbit proof. Found out last year that we have really good jumpers in my area, and they were jumping in and out of the raised beds at will. They even had a litter of their babies in one of my raised beds last year. So anyway, you can make the raised beds a little bit higher to minimize bending when gardening. Okay, here's the picture of the onions with the irrigation. This is what it looked like before I filled it. You can see the hardware cloth on the bottom, and this is a 4x16, and I have a brace in the middle, and actually a little 2x4 on the top for sitting. Okay, site selection, pretty much the same as anything. Select an area with full sun, if possible, and you should have well-drained soil. So I would not recommend putting clay in your raised bed. If your native soil is really hard, got a lot of clay in it, I would you could maybe use a little bit, but you'd have to amend it with a lot of other things that have more organic matter in them. Again, avoid areas with long winter shadows. Just because it's sunny in the winter in the summertime doesn't mean it's going to be sunny in the wintertime. So keep that in mind when you're building or putting in a raised bed. Maximize your sun exposure. Most vegetable plants require that 5 to 8 hours of direct sunlight, and water should be available to each bed. Okay, what I want to do now is to go through a garden catalog. I'm going to start in August and I'm going to quit in February. But the garden calendar for winter crops, and in August is really the start of winter production. But you could not there's nothing that you would want to direct seed in your garden because it's just too hot. Especially the last few years, it's been really, really hot in the summertime, and you're not thinking too much about winter crops either, and they're not going to do well if they're direct seeded. But you can plant a number of crops: cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, celery, Brussels sprouts, kale, Swiss chard leeks, onions in pots, and like in a 6-pack or 12-pack in a shaded location, and get them going for a month or two, and then you'll be able to transplant them in the garden. In September, you can transplant or direct seed peas, and then you can plant additional cabbage, broccoli, celery, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, kale, chard, leeks, and onions. And keep them going and because they'll be ready to transplant in a couple months. In October, which is what we're kind of late October right here, but you can direct seed peas, beets, carrots, lettuce, parsnips, radish, spinach, Swiss chard, turnips, and onion seed. Those are great to be direct seeded right now. You can continue to plant cabbage, celery, broccoli, cauliflower, kale, Swiss chard, leeks, and onions in a shaded location. Notice from that last list that Brussels sprouts are not in it. Brussels sprouts are a really long season crop, and it's hard to get them germinated and planted before, and they'll probably never mature before the days get too hot next spring. November, well, you can direct seed peas, but I have a question mark there because what I've found is if you plant peas in a month, they'll be up about 6 inches or so, and the days are so short that they kind of stop growing. And they really don't get going again until January. The days get a little longer. So you can plant them in November, but you're not going to get peas until February, and you can plant them in December and get peas in February. So they just kind of slow down with the short days and cool weather. But you can continue to plant beets, carrots, lettuce, parsnip, radish, spinach, and Swiss chard, and turnips. Excuse me. And then you can plant your transplants of cabbage, celery, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, kale, kohlrabi, Swiss chard, leeks, and onions. In December, you can direct seed beets, carrots, lettuce, parsnips, peas, radish, spinach, Swiss chard, and turnips. If you can find them, you can plant asparagus roots in December, and seed potatoes. But most garden stores don't put those things out until January. So if you can find them, it's fine to plant, but it's sometimes hard to find. Plant transplants of broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower, kale, kohlrabi, and onion. January, you can still direct seed, all of those same things that we had in the December list. You should be able to find asparagus roots and seed potatoes in the garden stores in January. And then you can continue to plant transplants of broccoli, cauliflower, kale, cabbage, and kohlrabi. Notice that Brussels sprouts is not listed in January because they won't mature before it gets too hot. February, direct seed your beets, carrots. That's the same list as before. All of these will mature before it gets too hot, usually in April. You continue to plant asparagus roots and seed potatoes and transplants of broccoli, cabbage, kale, and kohlrabi. Okay, I have a few pictures from my garden that I'd like to show. This is garlic. In February or October right now is a really good time to plant garlic. And in February, it will look kind of like the picture on the left, and in late May, it'll look like the picture on the right. You can see the seed pods on the top. It's called an umbel, and it's nearing harvest. It'll probably be a week or so, and those will be ready to harvest. You can grow artichokes in a raised bed. I was amazed at how well they did, and gophers really like artichoke, and so a raised bed is a really good place to put them because you can screen out the gophers. Celery you can grow there. Notice I have a kind of a canopy over the picture on the right. That's a 1/2-inch PVC, and I use that to put bird netting over it in the wintertime. Usually the birds sometimes really like the winter vegetables, especially broccoli. And in the summertime, you could put shade cloth over it, and you'll see a bunch more on the next picture. But broccoli, celery, lettuce, Swiss chard, turnips, they do all really great in a raised bed. And these are all straw raised beds. I don't have any active straw raised beds in my garden right now. That's all wooden, but they serve the purpose. That's how I got started in raised bed gardening. They're very economical to put together. Onions. Anybody that knows me knows that I really like to plant onions. And this bed on the upper left, the seed was probably planted 1st of January, and this is probably February. And then the picture on the upper right is onions probably later in May, and then the bottom picture shows the close-up of some of the onions that I've grown. Okay, let's talk a little bit about garden pests. Cabbage worms are you don't find cabbage worms very often in the summertime, but they do really like cabbage, and they like broccoli, they like cauliflower, but the easy way to control them is a chemical called BT. It's an organic chemical, and it's not a real bad chemical at all. It's the real name of it is Bacillus thuringiensis, but a little of that BT will kill any worm, any crawly type insects. Aphids and ants can be a problem in the summer as well as the winter, and I think they're probably even worse in the wintertime. But one of the things, if you can control the ants, you go a long way towards controlling the aphids. So there are traps you can get to control ants. There are some sprays that aren't too toxic, but you need to control the ants first, and then if there's any aphids left, then take care of them. Birds are a real big pest, especially where I live, and so I don't like to get rid of the birds. I like the birds, so I try to use bird netting as much as possible. Ground squirrels are they kind of march to their own tune. And if you want to keep ground squirrels out of your beds, you almost have to totally enclose them. I found that a nice tight bird netting can work to keep them out. I staple it to the top of my wooden raised beds, and it seems to work pretty well. Gophers, the half-inch hardware cloth is a really good way to keep the gophers out. With the hardware cloth, I don't have any problems with gophers in my garden, and I don't trap them that often either. So anyway, that's what I have on pest, and I think that is all. I thank you for your attention, and hopefully we will get some questions.
This person would love to know more about planting onions.
Oh, that's my favorite subject. I'm really glad you brought that question up, because I really like to grow onions, and I buy onion plants from a company in Texas. They're the largest onion plant supplier in the country. And they sell plants. They don't sell bulbs. They don't sell little things. It's an actual plant. And the more you buy, the cheaper they become. They come in bunches of 50 to 75. And I've had the best luck planting them in the 1st of January. And as a plant, you can plant seed in October and end up with onion plants as well, but it's a whole lot, and then transplant them with good spacing. But it's a whole lot easier to buy from this company, and I'm not sure I'm allowed to mention the name, but I would love to mention it. They're the only place I've bought onion plants for the last 10, 15 years.
I think it's fine. Go ahead and say it.
Okay. The name of the company is Dixondale Farms, and they're located in Texas. They sell, and it's really important that when you buy onions, if you live in Southern California, the onions you should be looking for are short day onions. They may try to sell you something that's a midday or a long day, but they will not produce a bulb in Southern California. And they'll show you the zones on their website, but it's really important to use short day onions. And I planted some midday onions a couple of years ago. They did not do well, and so it's short day is the only thing I plant, and I can get some really good sized onions. So you plant them in early January. Of course, you prep the soil. I use a mix of fertilizers, and then once they're established, you should hit them with a little nitrogen every 3 weeks, straight nitrogen. Just sprinkle it over the plants and water it in, and do that until just before harvest, and you will get some really great tomato bulbs. And good plants, and the more foliage you see on the top of the tomato, the bigger the potential for the onion is, because an onion is really not a root crop, even though it shows up as a lot of root crops. It's really not. It's an enlarged stem, and so the more leaves the onion has on it, the more potential it has to become a large onion. Does that take care of it?
That's pretty comprehensive. Okay, another question. What do you think about Sluggo Plus for ant control?
I use that chemical, and I like it. I like it really well. I use it for slugs, and it works really well for me. I like it.
Okay. What is a good material to protect plants from ground squirrels and birds? You had mentioned netting. Is there a certain type of netting you use?
Yeah, you can go to a a hardware store or a garden store, and they will have, or online. I buy mine from Amazon, but you can go online and pick up. They have a myriad of sizes. So you order the size that you want to cover, and plus a little bigger if you to make sure. But it works really well for keeping out birds, and I found that it does work to keep out ground squirrels too.
Great. When planting garlic with garlic starts, what month should we plant? Also, hardneck or soft?
Either one would, if you do the hardneck or the soft neck, either one you should plant in October, right about now. And so October is a prime month. I lived in Michigan. I still planted them in October, and they overwinter through snow and freezing soil and everything. But they do really, really well. This and they're ready to harvest by the end of May, 1st of June, and then you can plant something else.
Can you use diatomaceous earth for aphids, ants, and cabbage worms?
I've never had luck with them on cabbage worms, but supposedly diatomaceous earth will take care of ants, but I think you have to keep it. Once it gets wet, then you have to keep applying it, and so it's not my favorite. I've used it. I have some, but I don't use it all the time because it just doesn't work quite as well as I'd like it to. Mentioned before that Sluggo Plus, I've kind of got to like that chemical, and it really takes care of the slugs and the snails for sure. And I think it takes care of several other pests as well. It does. I think it does have some chemical in it, but it's not a bad chemical.
Can you talk about curing onions?
Yes, I can. I harvest them in early June, and I just put them in a single layer in my garage or some dry place, and let the tops dry down. And so probably a month or so, the tops should be dry down. They're dry enough you can just cut them off, and so you cut off the tops, cut off the root, and then you can store them in a kind of a definitely a shaded location, but put them in a box no more than one layer because they need ventilation. And actually, the longer they store, the short onions don't have a real long shelf life, but I have some that from this last year that I'm still using, and they're fine. They're fine. So, but in storage, they should only be one level. They need some ventilation.
Is there a general rule for how big plants should be prior to transplanting? Is it the same for all winter crops?
Certainly they need to have true leaves. I would not plant the cotyledon. The first thing that comes up from a seed is the cotyledon, and you would not want to transplant that. But once they get true leaves, you can transplant it at that point. But if they have like 4 true leaves, it's even better. But I wouldn't let them get too terribly big. Because then they could get root bound, and that's some other issues. So, and when you're in a garden store looking for plants, don't be afraid to pull the plant out of the cell and take a look at it. And if the roots are all wrapped around everything, don't buy that plant. Buy one that's a little smaller and doesn't have roots all over the place.
Looks like that's it. So we're going to go ahead and end for this evening. Thank you very much, Lee, and thank you everyone for joining us this evening. Be sure to check out the rest of our Zoom and in-person classes.
Okay, well, thanks for letting me into your home.
All right. Good night, everybody. Thank you again.
Good night.
Thanks, Lee.
Okay.
Good night.